There are many obstacles that can block the path to a successful software project. When you come across one, it helps to think like a seasoned hiker and follow the trail marked by blue blazes around the problem so that you can get back on course and keep moving forward. Welcome to Blue Blazes Podcast. I'm your host for the journey, Jay Tower, and I'm a partner and principal consultant at Trailhead Technology Partners. In this series, we talk with industry experts who share their best tips for avoiding the pitfalls on the path to successful software projects. My guest in this episode is Cecelia Martinez. Cecilia is a lead developer advocate at OutSystems, a leading low-code development platform. She's passionate about open source developer tools and helping developers improve some of the most frustrating parts of their work, like testing, debugging, mobile deployments, and fighting with YAML. She's known for her work at companies like Ionic, Replay, and Cypress, as well as her efforts to build a more inclusive developer community. She is a volunteer and organizer with many groups in the Atlanta area and a former GitHub star. In this episode, we talk about low-code platforms and how they can help make software projects more predictably successful. Let's jump in. Well, hello there, Cecelia. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast to talk about low code and no code. I know you're sort of new in your role at OutSystems that does low code and no code, but you've been doing this developer relations role for quite a while. So tell me what you've been learning over these last several weeks in this new role about OutSystems and low code and no code.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot to learn. I started at, just basically when the year started and taking over on the developer advocacy team here at OutSystems. If you may or may not know, OutSystems actually acquired Ionic, I was a developer advocate there at Ionic previously. So I've now been working on the OutSystems platform and learning a lot about what it means to build with low code. I've worked with developer tools in the more traditional sense for the past several years. And so that has been kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift. I'm used to dealing with, specific syntax issues and configurations and dependencies and package managers and API docs and everything. And so being able to think in a kind of more visual, high level approach to building software has been really kind of expanding my horizons a lot. For sure.
No doubt. Well, for those that aren't familiar with those terms or maybe have heard those terms before, but haven't had a chance to look into them and what does that mean exactly to you? What's been your most helpful way to understand or to explain what is low code or no code and how does that compare to traditional custom development?
Yeah, so in my mind, low code or no code to that extent as well. OutSystems is a low code platform, so you do have access to the code as well. In my mind, it's an abstraction. So the same way that you may use a front end framework like React or Vue or Angular as an abstraction over JavaScript, low code is an abstraction over the underlying code, which in this case is actually JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and .NET and SQL on the back end. So OutSystems is a full stack low-code platform, and really that's essentially a visual editing experience that's abstracted on top of that code. So instead of typing syntax in order to create components for your UI or to define business logic or to create models for your data, you're doing that visually within a development environment to kind of craft out what those different components may look like. You may be familiar with no-code tools, which kind of are like drag and drop site builders. If you've used like a blog platform before where you kind of are pulling widgets in, those really don't give you as much of the flexibility because they are full no code. They have really great use cases. Obviously they can be really helpful for citizen developers or if you don't have any coding experience at all and you want to build sites. OutSystems is kind of a different level from that where we're low code, but we also do give you access to the underlying code. So you're able to build what we call like mission critical apps where you need to make sure that they're scalable, reliable, secure, performant in ways that you may not be able to achieve with no code.
So in that scenario, how often is it the same person that's doing the visual development and also then doing the customization or more detailed or advanced work in the generated code? Do you find?
A lot more than I realized. So when I first came to OutSystems, I really hadn't worked with low code platforms before. Really, my experience was that site builder, if we needed, like for marketing pages, like you see them in HubSpot, right? Like landing pages that you may build out really quickly. But actually, OutSystems developers, as I've gotten to know more of the community and the developers in the ecosystem, are real developers. A lot of them actually came from either Java backgrounds or C# backgrounds, who had full code software development experience and have brought that into the OutSystems platform, because you do need to be able to understand, for example, how to do queries. It's a visual query editor, but you still need to be able to craft performant queries. You need to understand things like data types, how to create, Booleans and create control flow logic. It's just that you're doing it visually versus actually typing out syntax. So I always kind of had this idea in my head. I will admit, I have all this, probably the same biases or preconceptions around low code that a lot of people have, in that I think of it as somebody who maybe doesn't have any coding experience, and it's a way for them to kind of build simple sites. But yeah, the OutSystem developers that I have met have a lot of really complex software engineering experience. And actually, because OutSystems and low code abstracts away some of the more tedious things that you typically have to do with full code, they're able to focus more on kind of high level complex problems around software architecture. What are the different how's the infrastructure, like this deployment system, is going to look like what problems are we solving for our user. So it's really more of an accelerator for builders, people who are more focused on outcomes versus the process, and people who are kind of software crafters and love the eloquence and the elegance of code. um, it's kind of, you can get into that if you want to, but really it's about abstracting some of that complexity away.
Okay. Well, that brings up my next question, I think, which is probably on the minds of a lot of, especially the software creators that might be listening or watching this, who are familiar with doing custom development, and maybe, this whole topic sounds a little like something they might not care about. So, from their perspective, uh, how do you explain it to somebody like that, as far as where's the line, or where everything in engineering is a trade-off. So
Right.
if you're going to do low code for some things and you're going to do custom development for some things, how do you look at that as what are the right types of projects for each of those technologies? Is it a mix? How do you see that breaking down?
Yeah, so it really depends on like the types of apps that you're building, in terms of the really what we've actually found that works best is when OutSystems is integrated across the entire organization, across multiple teams, because then you're able to better leverage like the reusability that you get from having a consistent tool across the entire software development lifecycle. So if you, for example, only use it for internal apps, or for kind of taking a spreadsheet and building a UI in front of it, and some of the more simpler use cases, then and other teams are more dedicated to doing full code solutions, then you end up with a lot of duplication of the same efforts, and you're not being able to leverage kind of the modular approach that you get from using one tool. Now, that is to say that it depends also on the resources that you already have in-house. If there is you can customize the UI of OutSystems. It has a built-in look, but you can go in, you can create your own CSS like design files and create your own design systems. You can integrate with a lot of different types of tools. But ultimately, it depends on what your goals are. And we have found that like organizations that would like to modernize and have more of a digital transformation can do that a lot faster with OutSystems. So if you have a lot of things that you need to change at one time, if you need to accelerate that, that's where OutSystems and low code specifically can really come into play, because low code is a multiplier. It's kind of similar to how people are integrating AI a lot more into software development now, right? It's not something that can necessarily replace the knowledge of human brains making software and making those decisions, but it can accelerate the impact of those human brains making, software decisions. And so if it's something where maybe you're building, you have one product, like maybe you're a product company and you have a single product, single app, and that's all you're developing, and you have only one use case, then that may not be like the best use of low code, because you're not going to be able to get that multiplying factor. We have, but if you're a company and you have 500 apps across your organization that are being built for external and for internal use cases, then you're able to get a lot more out of leveraging low code, because of that multiplication factor is just continues to be exponential.
Okay. Um, what are some of the pain points from traditional software development that you see low code solving? And then, opposite question of that too, with low code, what are some of the challenges that are introduced that maybe don't exist as much in a traditional development project?
Yeah, so I think of it as reducing variability. And that's kind of the biggest productivity gain and developer experience gain in my perspective. So I mentioned I worked with developer tools in the past, like, and I did worked a lot with kind of integrations and making different systems, making different tools play nice together. And I think, especially in the JavaScript ecosystem, that's something that we hit up against a lot. It's like, oh, like I have to update the dependency on this package. Oh, and now it's not playing nice with like my type file. And now it's, I have to upgrade. Oh, when's the last time I ran npm install because I had to update something else? Or, and I think that's something where that tedious complexity of just fighting with the tools that you're using, that gets removed with something where you have a consistent tool across the entire software development lifecycle. So you're building, you're testing, you're deploying, you're maintaining, you're even doing things like your security vulnerability checks and your performance monitoring all in one platform. So that makes it to where you don't have to configure 100 different tools. You don't have to make them play nice together. Everything is kind of built in. So for me as somebody who's fought a lot with developer tools and getting everything to work together, that was for me like the biggest like aha, like, oh wow, like that's amazing, I don't have to do that. I think the other aspect that's interesting, obviously, is being able to have that visual representation of your code base, so to speak. I think that's something that there's a lot of cool tools out there now that are trying to make that happen, where you have your traditional code and it creates, for example, like a visual representation of the state machine that you're using, or of the dependencies and references within your code and how they connect to each other. With OutSystems, you kind of get that off the bat, right? So you're not only seeing it visually, but you're building it visually, and it helps to better understand the different relationships between your components and between your logic and between your data. And the other side of it, some of the kind of I guess challenges or other things that I've seen that may come up, is sometimes like there is some resistance just like using the tool and getting started with it, because of some of the same like preconceptions that I had, that it's, oh, I'm not going to be in the code, I'm going to lose control, or I'm not going to be doing as much writing code, so I'm going to lose skills. But what we found is like I said, instead you're able to use different parts of your brain to solve different types of problems. The same kind of a thing where if ChatGPT can create the code that you're spending 90% of your day writing, then you're probably not leveraging your skill set the way that you should. The other thing, as I kind of hinted at this before, is that there are people who are like software crafters who just really love the art of making beautiful, elegant code and like that kind of process. While you can dig into the code, while you can customize it, that's, it probably like will not be the best developer experience for you if that's the kind of developer that you are. If you do like to be able to kind of have the flexibility to iterate quickly and produce quickly, then that's where something like a low code platform can be helpful.
Yeah. So if just solving problems for the business makes you happy, great. But if like algorithms is your jam, maybe it's not low code. No code's not for you.
Yeah, exactly. If you have very, very strong opinions on, which specific state management system to use, but like even like, oh, this API is much better than this API, and oh, once it went to 4.0, like it all went out the window, then that's probably the kind of thing that you may not get the same level of nuance that you would with
Yeah.
traditional code.
One of the concerns I would think that probably a lot of new customers or new potential customers might have when they're talking to someone like OutSystems about doing a low code solution is this concept of vendor lock-in, which I would define basically as like if I get started with you and then you go out of business, or I don't like the next version of your system anymore and I want to make some, I want to go in some different direction, or I want to host it somewhere else than where you offer it to be hosted. Um, how does a low code solution like OutSystems address that type of thing?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways. I guess, obviously like what a lot of companies and organizations will say is things like, oh, like, well, we've been in business for 20 years, which OutSystems has, it's been the number one low code platform for a long time with, thousands of customers and 700,000 plus community members. But really, I think the main difference is actually a technical one. So I mentioned before, like a lot of site builders or low code platforms, you don't necessarily see what's happening under the hood, and it's compiling to something that you wouldn't actually recognize as code. OutSystems is built on top of, it's essentially a React app, on the front end. So it's JavaScript, HTML, CSS, but using React, .NET, and then SQL. So you're interfacing with paradigms and with languages that already exist and that aren't, you know, I forgot the word that aren't like only specifically tied. Like there's not like an OutSystems language that's actually being run, right? It's not something where it produces a binary that only
Right.
can proprietary. Thank you.
Proprietary. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was the
got
word.
it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so there's that aspect of it. The other aspect is that what OutSystems does well is that platform for building, for deploying, but we also want you to be able to interface with whatever system that you have in your current business, because it's about modernizing legacy applications. So if whether you're using like enterprise data systems, databases, APIs, we're essentially focused really on integrations. So you can take existing backends, you can leverage those and build a UI. You can bring in data from multiple different systems in order to, even do things like automations and do things like uh, timed computations based on that data. So because of that, we have a lot of different integrations, and we have an open source component library called Forge that has, like, I think it's like over 5,000 open source components that are all designed around allowing you to integrate with different systems. So it's not something where you necessarily have to jump all in with all of your data and all of your components and all of your logic within an OutSystems project. You can actually kind of piecemeal the integration with OutSystems while continuing to utilize other systems. And if you have like microservices that you're calling, different API endpoints. And in addition to that, everything is modular. So if you do decide, hey, we want to publish a specific component library that we're going to use across multiple projects, that can be shared across your entire organization. And it can even be published to Forge if you do want to make it open source and public to be able to leverage further on down the line.
Okay. So I've found that a lot of platforms that that encourage non-developers to get involved in development more hands-on like this. I'm thinking even way back to like the '90s with things like Microsoft Access or something. Um, uh, and when I think of those things, I think of a lot of inexperienced people doing things in a way that maybe isn't very good for collaboration. So I'm thinking like today, maybe not using Git repositories for your code, or not using CI/CD pipeline. So what do you find is a good way for somebody like that to be thinking about a low code solution, and when all of that collaboration tooling should be involved?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start by saying, like, not all low code is created the same, and it serves different use cases. So when it comes to OutSystems, when you start to use the platform, you really do either you are a developer or you end up becoming a developer, because you do have to understand all those different concepts. So OutSystems, you have version control, you have user access management that you have to configure, you have automated deployments, there's testing components that you will integrate with as well. And all of that, just because it happens to be kind of in this visual paradigm, you're still needing to ensure that you have correct software architecture concepts and patterns that you're following. and that you are involved with the software development lifecycle from the beginning to the end. So, because of that, OutSystems, while it is used sometimes by people with less experience, they tend to either be on a team that does have more experienced developers who are working alongside them, or they end up skilling up to the point where they are essentially a software developer in their own right because of the complexity that goes into it. And the thing about OutSystems is you really can't escape like CI/CD, and you can't escape testing, and you can't escape performance and architecture considerations because it's all baked into the same platform. So I worked on teams where I create a front end and I call a back end and I have no idea what's going on back there. Like, who knows? And then it goes to a different team who writes tests. Then it goes to a different team that actually does the deployment. And I have no idea how any of that happens. Without systems, all of that is integrated in the same platform so that when I make changes and I publish those changes, it's all happening in one place. So I'm seeing all of that in action. I actually understand where those steps are taking place. And that gives me a kind of more of a full, well-rounded understanding of what the software development lifecycle looks like versus just my one little sliver of it. So I think that it actually can help to introduce some of those concepts earlier on than you may see in a traditional code environment where it's more siloed and more kind of more separated.
Okay. So I mentioned this earlier, but OutSystems recently acquired you by way of acquiring Ionic. And
Yes.
I'm guessing that my audience will be a little more familiar with Ionic maybe than they are with OutSystems. For those that aren't, of course, Ionic is this fantastic platform that allows web developers, especially, to make cross-platform mobile apps and progressive web apps. So talk a little bit, maybe if you don't mind, about how those two coming together is going to be powerful in the long term. Like, what's the long-term roadmap there for how Ionic and OutSystems work together?
Yeah, so it's been a slow journey so far, and that Ionic has, even though the acquisition happened more than a year ago, Ionic has actually been continuing to act independently, developing its own products, having its own teams. We're now at the stage where we are, kind of coming together in terms of how we can leverage each other's expertise and technology. So, for example, OutSystems also is a cross-platform development platform, so you can build to mobile PWA and then also the web from the same code base, so to speak. And so that's something where we're looking at how to integrate some of the technology that supports Ionic and building that into the platform because it is such a high quality kind of cross-platform tooling, as well as the mobile delivery service we have called AppFlow, which is built by Ionic, and how that technology can also be leveraged within the OutSystems platform. But in addition, I think it's been really interesting just to see the overlap in how we engage with different types of developers, how the different teams can work together. But as continuing forward, like Ionic is obviously a very strong community. It's a very strong brand. It has really great, well used, well loved products that it builds, and that they are open source. And that's something that OutSystems has committed to continuing to support and ensuring that that will not change. So that's been really great to see that content kind of continue to flourish on the Ionic side as well. So really, it's about kind of maximizing the best of both worlds. I hate to use the word synergy, but it kind of pops up now and then in terms of, where can OutSystems developers gain from Ionic, and where can Ionic community gain from learning more about, kind of what these low code options for and what use cases may make sense for them. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I know AI is impacting a lot of things right now, or at least from a marketing perspective, it's impacting things. How do you see AI impacting the low code offerings that you're doing at OutSystems and other things in the low code world right now?
yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier that low code and AI are both what I consider multipliers, right? And so you don't want to necessarily replace the work that's being done by software engineers, by human software engineers, but you think how can we use this to like exponentially increase either productivity or quality in the terms of what we're building. So OutSystems has actually has been leveraging AI now for, I mean, obviously since before I joined here, but into a couple of different areas of the platform, because it believes that the combination of AI and low code together is an even higher multiplier. So, for example, there is the AI Mentor Studio, which is integrated to the platform that does things like gives you code recommendations during the app dev process, but it also has features in the DevOps kind of lifecycle management aspect, in that it does automatic code scanning, security vulnerabilities, performance scanning and monitoring, and makes recommendations based on that as well. In addition, OutSystems is also piloting a, essentially a product designed more for those kind of inexperienced, we call citizen developers, that is all about app gen. So giving a prompt and then using AI to either to generate from scratch or to add to an existing application, and leveraging that tooling as well. That's still something that's being developed, but it's all kind of things that you can, again, multiplication factors to the existing platform. So you just like how you can write in traditional code, the next abstraction is using a visual framework where a lot of that the tedium has been removed. The next abstraction above that is, okay, where can we leverage AI that it makes sense? And then where can we leave the humans to do their best work? And so that's been really exciting to see, because that's not something that I have seen us do as much on the, with Ionic. And so the AI, and aside from being able to integrate with, obviously, with like AI APIs, like OpenAI and ChatGPT APIs, but actually seeing it integrated to the product itself has been pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like those two things, low code and AI, go hand in hand really well. I could see them creating as tools, integrating really well and helping people create software who maybe don't even know a lot about creating software.
Yeah, one of the things that I've kind of heard people mention before is the Excel spreadsheet to app pipeline. Where it's
Yeah.
you have a shared spreadsheet that everyone's been editing for like years, and then finally it's like, hey, we should make this into a real app with and being able to just quickly do that in something like OutSystems right now with low code. But then in my mind thinking even, oh, like eventually there could be a day where I just upload the spreadsheet and then it just outputs an app based on what the data is off that model, without even having to do much more than that. So
How cool would that be if you uploaded the spreadsheet and then it asked you a bunch of questions, generated by AI to help clarify how you wanted it built, and then just did that? That would be amazing.
yeah. And the nice thing about like I said, when you have a consistent platform across all of your teams, then you also tend to have very consistent organizational structures in terms of how you approach problems. So chances are your data entities are going to have similar structures. The way that you approach how you encapsulate your business logic is going to be similar. And as opposed to maybe having all your different teams with piecemeal solutions and approaches. And I think that makes it even easier to leverage something like AI, because you're going to have more predictable, consistent results if the data in is also more predictable and consistent.
Well, I know we met at a event out in the community, and that's part of your job, is going to things like that. So, do you have any coming up in the next few months where people could find out more about OutSystems and Ionic?
Yeah, so I'll actually be at DevOps Days Raleigh in April, on April 10th and 11th. I'm actually really excited because I spoke there last year and it was such an awesome event. Last year I spoke about testing and production, and this year I'll actually be talking about, kind of AI and DevOps. So, which hot topic these days for sure. So,
Yeah.
yeah, people can check that out. DevOps Days Raleigh.
Okay. And then if people want to learn more about how OutSystems does low code, where should they get started with that?
Yeah, I'd recommend, outsystems.com, honestly, is a good primer. We also do have a developer community that has We have a developer community page that has things like free training. You can create a free personal environment to play around with it and make some apps and kind of get your hands dirty with it. That's a really great place to start. That's also where you'll find our open source kind of Forge component library and different resources that we have. And that's just, outsystems.com/community.
Okay. Yeah. Easy to find. All right. Last question, Cecilia. We've been talking about low code, and of course, the theme of the podcast in general is about making projects more successful for software teams. What other topics do you think would be great to talk about, or what other guests should we be talking to learn from them about what they're doing to make their projects more successful?
Yeah, so a couple of things I've seen that have been really interesting. I have a few, if that's okay. um,
Sure.
one is debugging. So debugging is something that can really derail a software developer's like productivity, and I think that Philip Rick and Replay are doing some really cool things in the debugging space specifically that can help increase developer happiness and productivity. I also am a really big proponent of testing. I think if you are going to be building anything, it should be tested. But there's a lot of different ways to approach testing, obviously, that can be more effective than others. And Mark Noonan has done some really great education and talks around that space at Cypress. And I've also been really interested in learning more about automated workflows that are outside of an application code base. And Sylvia Vargas is at Ingest, and I've been kind of reading more about what she's been producing and learning there, and that's been really interesting to see what's happening in that space too.
Okay. Yeah, all very interesting people and topics. Thank you for those ideas. And thank you so much for your time today talking about low code, no code solutions and making software projects more easy to build using them. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It was super fun. Always great to chat.
Yeah, thank you. That's the end of this Blue Blazes podcast. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one with industry experts focused on how to make software projects more predictably successful, make sure to subscribe. Trailhead can be found online at trailheadtechnology.com, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks for listening.